Hello everyone, welcome to night 41 of the Orphan's Tales Live quarantine reading series. Hey, good to see everyone. Particularly good to see everyone since my toddler son threw my phone in the bathtub today. But fortunately, it was just water resistant enough that it didn't cause any damage. I got to it fast enough, but this could have been a very bad situation. And I guess it's just a little cleaner now. But yeah, the phone took a bath today. Happy Eurovision Day, everybody. It was a sad Eurovision Day. There was no Eurovision for the first time since 1956. Eurovision was cancelled. Disneyland burned down. And instead we had a weird, kind of off-putting show called Europe Shine a Light. That was none of the things anyone really wanted it to be, and yet all of them at the same time. It was a very odd vibe. But there is always next year, I suppose. I just don't really understand why we couldn't have done it at home, why we couldn't have had everybody perform. Like, everything else has managed to figure out a way to do it from home. I think probably when they made the decision to cancel, we weren't far enough along into quarantine to figure out how to do it. But if Saturday Night Live can manage to do it from home, I think Eurovision could have done it. But alas, all we have are the official videos to argue about forever until next year. Hopefully there is a next year. That's cheerful. Let me do my intro stuff so we can get right into it. As always, this is not an audiobook of The Orphan's Tales. It is a play. You can find music based on this book at sjtucker.com. You can get copies of the book at your local independent bookseller's online web portal. If you would like to support mine, it's printbookstore.com. But definitely look up your own and find out who's still selling in your area. You can find me on Twitter at Cat Valenti. You can find me on Patreon at Cat Valenti and subscribe there. You can ask me questions after the reading if you like, but do try to think of them while I'm reading, because the dead air of waiting for questions is no one's friend. You can catch up with the archive at Cat Valenti Live on YouTube, which is now completely up to date. And you can put something in my tip jar if you like, here on Instagram, in my profile, on my YouTube profile, or on my website, which is catherinemvalenti.com. You don't have to at all, but it would be deeply appreciated, as being an artist right now is an entire horror movie. And anyone who does give me a tip, I will thank you by name on the next stream. And that's everything. I hope everyone's doing as well as possible tonight. We're really coming up on it now. I said Ugly Mermaid. I'm actually not totally sure if we're gonna get to the Ugly Mermaid tonight. Yeah, I think we are. We'll at least get to her illustration. Yeah. So, I forgot to get myself a drink. Blah, no good. I fell asleep on the couch until 15 minutes before this started, so I'm a little out of it, but I know you don't mind. And let's my poor little book actually is starting to, this is an old edition, you know, this is like my copy from back in the day, so it's actually starting to separate. it's not doing too well, but hopefully it'll hold up through the end of the book, which is only about 50 pages away. The Pale Girl's Tale continued. Sigrid seemed engrossed in picking the dirt and bits of rope from under her fingernails. She stared at them intently, avoiding Snow's pale eyes. And that, little love, is where I ceased to be the hero of my own tale. 7 years went by, and then my year on the river currents. My time was not so very different than any other saint. I read, I prayed, I studied sky maps and sea maps. I illuminated countless manuscripts with tiny golden griffin and their infants. My hair grew back. I did not cut it as many of the others did. They wished to be humbled before the stars and their servant, Saint Sigrid. I believed that I was blessed, chosen. I believed, the great woman paused and grimaced, closing her eyes as if her mouth was flooded with bile. I believed that I was the orphan of the prophecy, for I was alone in the world, was I not? My mother was alive when I left her, but perhaps by now she had died and her body was lying cold on a slab of ice in the temple, tended by my sisters. This was my reasoning, my folly. I was more eager to believe my own mother dead than that I was not spoken of in some old ballad. I let my hair grow long, for I knew that the wolves had led me astray, and my destiny was to find the lost maidenhead and her captain. In one swallow, Eyvind drained the last of his mug and grunted softly, mockingly. Sigrid smiled ruefully. As soon as I was able, I left the tower and the dreaming city and took to the sea in my little ship. For the last task of a Sigrid is to build a ship with her own hands, to perfect its lines and sails and prove that it is seaworthy. On the day of my trials, my craft performed spectacularly, but instead of returning to receive my marks, I simply sailed away into the horizon. For years upon years, I searched for any sign of the Ichnesus, for a tale of its passing. I scoured every sailor's haunt and foul-smelling tavern for someone who could tell me where this creature swam. How could something so vast hide itself from me? I found nothing, not even a whisper of such a beast. Most had never even heard the word. Finally, I was forced to admit that perhaps I had been mistaken, that my mother lived, or that I was simply not the woman of the prophecy. When this truth settled in me, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a well, I died. I died to the world. I was despondent. In my grief, I sailed into a storm that my poor ship could not survive. It was dashed to pieces, and I was dragged from the sea by a Muraner's fishing boat, seaweed clogging my mouth, my lips gone blue as sapphires. The fisherman rubbed life back into my limbs and cleared the ropey leaves from my mouth and fed me a thin broth until I could stand on my own. Muran is far to the north, the last part of the world, graced by Sigrid's ship and her crew. It seemed a good enough place to waste the last of my days. Sigrid looked up at Eyvind, a strange cloud passing over her broad features. There were other reasons to stay. Things lying in the secret quarters of this town I thought were long dead. But in my failure, in my shame and my hubris, I could not seek them out. Instead, I tied the knots of men's nets on the docks and drank myself into dreams until I could forget that I once imagined myself the child of destiny, a heroine meant for the greatest task any Sigrid would wish for herself. Snow thought that she could see tears well up in Sigrid's tired eyes, but she could not be sure. She put her hesitant hand on the older woman's fingers, warm and brown beneath her icy palm. When my parents died, Snow said quietly, and my hair went silver overnight, I thought it was a sign from the stars that I was their special daughter, that they would be my mother and my father. I thought I was meant for something more. But I do not even have nets to mend every day. I scrape in the street for a bit of fish and bread. I starve in the belly of a half-built ship most nights. It is not a grand destiny, but at least it is mine, and without it I would not have known a real living saint. Snow touched her long shimmering hair, in awe of it as she ever was, and as ashamed. I'm afraid I'm a poor kind of saint for you, my girl, maybe the worst kind. Her words were cut off by a loud bang. The door of the Arms slamming open as a riotous group of 3 bizarre creatures burst into the common room, laughing raucously, like a pack of raccoons squabbling over a rubbish heap. 2 enormous men, their muscles nodding under tattooed skin. Not an inch of flesh showed, which was not covered in colorful illustrations of battles at sea. Mermaids with their arms trailing kelp, snarling tigers, lighthouses with beacons alight, carrying between them a massive wooden tub filled to the brim with sloshing water. It spilled over the side onto the floor every time the men moved, and by the time they reached the bar, half the floor was swimming in brine. In the tub was a woman with green gills opening at her throat, an inferno of green hair blazing around her head, and skin that held the sickly pallor of a fish. Her meaty hands were webbed as a frog's, her ears long and thin like tiny fins. She was naked, and her ample breasts sagged heavily, tipped in blue nipples. From the waist down, her legs merged into a long, corpulent tail, silver-violet, with translucent tendrils flapping where her feet might have been. She took great pleasure in thrashing the tail about, spraying the other patrons with water. Snow stared in wonder. "Is that a mermaid?" she gasped. Eyvind pushed back his chair with a loud screech of wood on wood. "If only. Mermaids are pretty as daisies, and they sing nice little rhyming songs all the day long. They smell a fair sight better than that heap of dead clams. That's a Magyar, and she'll drink me into the street in an hour." He trundled over to the boisterous trio, his face a cold glower. After a moment, Sigrid and Snow followed, curious as a pair of kittens. "Oi, Eyvind!" the Magyar hollered, her voice like a wave sluicing through a tide pool, cluttered with clapping muscles. "Fill my gullet with ale and my men's bellies with some of that foul bread you cook up in your back room. Have I got a story for you? You'll never believe it, not in a month of miracles." "I never believe any of your stories, Grog, and you'll show me your coin before you get a drop." She ran a corpse-colored hand through her emerald hair, and when it came away, it was full of rough, filthy golden coins, so old Snow had never seen their like. They were embossed, faintly, worn by countless hands and pockets with the image of a single eye. Grog bit one of them with satisfaction. Sigrid stiffened. "Aye, the great cow knows what these are, coined from the Armaspian Oculos, 200 years and more extinct, and yet I've got more of their coin than any collector in Ajanab. Ask me where I got it. Go on, ask me." Grog was crowing, stroking her shiny gills with delight. "Where did you get it?" Sigrid asked, her voice icy and low. Grog licked her bluish lips in anticipation and seized her tankard in one huge hand, the thin webbing between her fingers slapping wetly against the metal. "My men, that's Sheepshank and Turk's Head, you know, and it doesn't matter which one's which, have booked us passage on a sweet little schooner, captained by a beast the likes of which a mother wouldn't even threaten her squalling brats with." Here we have an amazing illustration of Sheepshank and Turk's Head and Grog. The Magyar's Tale. "She were 7 feet tall if she were an inch. I swear by my mother's 5th teat. All sweetness and light from the neck up, a regular princess, with hair like melting butter and starry eyes, but those legs! The deer's legs right down to the hoof, or would have been if she had hooves. Instead, she had great flapping frog's feet and turquoise wings, feathers and all, tucked up against her back. Her skin was all over tiger stripes. Her hands were furry as a wolf's, with great clacking claws. And of all things, a thick gray tail wagged through a slit in her skirts. She was a perfect monster. But beggars can't be choosers. I can swim just as fine as a young shark, of course, but poor Sheepshank, he can't swim a stroke to save his throat, and Turk's Head has a deathly fear of the sea. Anyway, I prefer to travel in style, with my tub full of warm water and a mug of rum in each hand. An ocean is cold as a witch's womb, don't you know it? Makes my tail peel to go wallowing through it week after week. A ship is far better suited to my taste, even if Turk's Head retches like a pregnant wench every time a stiff wave washes the deck. Now, my youngest sister had spawned not a fortnight before, me being the maternal type, practically bursting at the gills with motherly affection. I wanted to see my little nieces and nephews whilst they was still wiggling little tadpoles. Enjoy a month's helping of my sister's whitefish and squid pies. But the sea has spread my family as far as the 4 winds would take us, and Tax Grotto is a full month's sail over the ice caps from Muron. Muroners don't take kindly to those of the maritime persuasion mucking up the berthing on their ships, so Sheepshank and Turk's Head asked after the most desperate captain on the docks, one who wouldn't turn their dainty nose up at a paying fare. And that's how we met Magadan. Sheepshank and Turk's Head carried my tub over to her finger pier. I slapped the side of the old boat, fine old locust wood by the color, though more than a little dingy and worse for wear. I peered at the hull, where the ship's name appeared to have been carved into the wood by an inexpert hand. "Witch's Kiss," it read rather shakily. Just then her head appeared from behind the second mast. "Are you looking for passage north, then?" Old man Glendower told me he'd be sloshing on by. That woman's voice was like hot wine on a cold night. I gestured for my boys to set me down. "What are you, woman, the city zoo?" Sheepshank barked laughter at my little joke, but the lady just smiled. Hardly. There was a wizard some years back. He favored me with a change of costume. She scratched at the tops of her blue wings with a lazy claw. Ain't there always a wizard, though? Bloody menace, if you ask me. No one cares for the likes of us freaks, but a whole stinking heap of us never caused the trouble of one wizard in an ever-down tower. I thumped my tail in sympathy, but Turk's head leered at her and gnashed his teeth. I stroked his bald head to calm him, just like a pup, my Turk's head is. Can't stand the smell of a stranger. I traced circles on his painted pate as Turk's head moaned in pleasure. So pray tell, Lady Menagerie, how'd you come by a ship as big as all this? Captain, all by yourself, and no one stabbing you in the heart in the depths of the night to steal it. The beast maiden swung lightly down from the upper deck and fixed her amber eyes on me. She moved faster with those mixed-up limbs than I would have thought. If I tell you the tale, will you buy passage on my ship and look nowhere else? I'm hungry as a whelp without a dam. I'd be glad of the wage. I gripped her hand in mine straight away. Flippers on claws. No one else would have taken us anyhow. Aye, that I will. Well done. Just as there's always a wizard, there is always a hero ready to rescue a pretty girl. And some do think me pretty, strange as it seems. But that's not important. My life didn't begin in truth until I came to Muron. The tale of the crew. Being a maiden, you see, is not quite the same as being alive. It's more like being a statue. The main skill of a maiden is to stand very still and look very beautiful. Even when I was a captive, I did little more than sit on my wooden stool and try not to cry. I was nothing. I did nothing. Not until I rode on the back of a red beast through the ramshackle gate of Muron did I ever take a step or utter a word that was not planned out for me by folk in black robes. Whether those robes were of parents or wizards, it did not matter much. But Beast, kind as he was, could do little more than leave me at the pier and suggest to the townsfolk that I might be a fair hand at sail mending or deck swabbing if one of them were to take me on. The throng of Muroners stood stock still in terror of the scarlet demon that carried me to them, and a few nodded dumbly, praying only that he would leave so that they could forget him all the sooner. Beast nibbled my ear with affection and trotted off back to his marsh and his king. When he had gone, the crowd spat on me and knocked me to the ground. They cut the webbing between my toes and half sawed my tail from my body. They would have broken my wings if they could have managed it, but I am no little bluebird in the hands of a child. My bones are strong, and they held. I was left bleeding and broken on the docks while they went laughing into their ship's holds for dinner. And night was coming on. What was I to do? All I knew, after all those years in my tower, was how to stay very still so that people could look at me. And so I lay there, utterly still, under the stars like chips of ice, until they came. I must have fallen asleep under the cold stones, for I awoke to a hand clamped over my mouth and a toothy hiss in my ear. Hush now, precious, hush now. The voice's owner dragged me up into its arms like a cat snatching the scruff of her kitten's neck. In a whirl of shuffling feet, foul breath, and foul murmurings, I was carried to a creaking ship and lashed to the mizzenmast. Well, my mixed-up girl, you wanted to serve on a ship. I promise you'll serve now. The voice that had hissed in my ear on the docks belonged to a high-cheeked captain in a hat festooned with threadbare blue feathers and worn velvet. He was handsome as a duke, save that when he smiled, his mouth was full of rotted teeth, yellow and decrepit as an old wolf's. Now, he said, we're going to sell you off at one southern port or another. If the mummers won't take you and the slavers won't take you, the fur traders will, and if they won't, the meat markets will. But in the meantime, you can put those mismatched parts to work scrubbing this ship splinter by splinter. He grinned and tipped his hat. And well, it's a long voyage south. After a few weeks, you'll look downright fetching, and really you're not bad from the chin up. I looked up at him, and my mouth watered behind my gag. I coughed politely to let him know I wished to speak, and he obligingly removed the filthy rag. I made my voice as sweet and flute-like as a princess can. You needn't sell me. I can be useful, and I won't fight you or your men. The captain shrugged and stood straight, brushing the knees of his breeches clean. This is what piracy is. If we took you, Willie, what kind of pirates would we be? You can be sweet as yielding as the first cream of the season with me, but do try to put on a good scream for my boys. Keeps morale up. I could not scrub the decks. My deer's legs would not bend, and my frog's feet slipped. I stumbled and fell, and a smart punch to the side would answer my clumsiness. I forgot, as the days went by, that I was a maiden, and then I forgot what a maiden was. The captain told me each morning he would expect me in his chamber that night. He told me each night I was too repulsive for his taste, but less ugly than you were yesterday, and uglier than you'll be tomorrow. One night the crew was drunk on their last rations of rum, and they hauled me to their quarters. I remembered to scream. They jeered like jackals and pelted me with slaps and blows, until one of them thought it would be a fine trick to cut off my hair. "We'll make her a real deckhand," he said, laughing, "and no one goes to sea with a head of yellow curls. Cut it off." He came behind me and gathered up my hair in his hands, my dragonfly wings fluttering in panic at the ends of the strands. Drawing his short blade, he sawed through the yellow locks, planting a slurping kiss on my bare neck. I did not know what would happen. I swear I did not. He cut my hair, yes, but instead of silky curls falling to the floor, blood began to sheet from the severed ends as though he had cut into my heart, and my wings buzzed so loudly I could hardly hear the men's cries of terror and disgust. They backed away from me, staring as blood soaked my shirt and the second-hand trousers they had found in a dead sailor's trunk. I stumbled to my feet, my vision a red blur. I felt very strange, as though all the creatures that had gone into my misshapen body were waking up, clawing for purchase on my soul. The wolf and the stag and the tiger and the bear, the frog and the dragonfly and the fish, all their many-colored voices begging to be heard, who had never so much as whispered before. My flesh was filled with howling, baying, croaking, crying, roaring, shrieking, so much shrieking like broken flutes thrown against a stone floor. The wolf leapt first, I think, and then the tiger. I clawed out the throats of 3 sailors, chewed through the ear of another before cutting into his eyes. The stag kicked at prone skulls, and the bear lunged into naked bellies. The frog and the dragonfly remembered to scream. When it was over, none of them were left. The room was empty as a prison cell. I wanted to feel sick. I wanted to delicately retch into the corner or feel faint, collapse in guilt. But I was not sick or faint, and the creatures in me exulted. Maidens stand still. They are lovely statues, and all admire them. Witches do not stand still. I was neither, but better that I err on the side of witchery that unlocks towers and empties ships. It was easy, once I had decided that, to slip into the captain's quarters and into that soft bed at last. The pillow was cool on my face, the blood of my hair dried and black against the fabric. I did not wait for him to wake, and I did not need a hidden knife. The bear opened him up like a beehive. I sailed a ghost ship back into Muron Port, and we will pick up there tomorrow with the Magyar's tale. And we see what happened to poor Magadan from some time ago. Oh, come on, book, you can make it. Oh, was not meant for such abuse, this poor little book. It's coming apart in my hands. I hope everyone enjoyed that. I forgot to get myself a drink, so imagine that I'm drinking. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask? This can end quickly if you don't. I will do my outro business while you think of questions if you have any. As always, this is not an audiobook of The Orphan's Tales. This is a play. You can find music based on these books at sjtucker.com. You can get copies of this at any of your local independent booksellers' online portals. Mine is printbookstore.com if you're interested in supporting a main company. You can find me on Twitter at Cat Valenti. You can find me on Patreon at Cat Valenti, where we're going to close out the poll as to what piece of media I'm reviewing this month in the next day or two. You can catch up in the archive at Cat Valenti Live on YouTube, which is all up to date, and I'll be uploading this one tonight. And you can put something in my tip jar. You don't have to at all, but if you are moved to, there is a jar on my Instagram profile, my YouTube profile, and on my website at catherinemvalenti.com. Everything's stupid for freelancers right now, so any contribution you could make would be deeply, deeply appreciated by our household, and I will thank anyone who does by name on the next stream. Do you think I'll ever do another reading? Maybe short fiction for the Patreon? Like, ever? God, I hope so. I've really enjoyed doing this. I've thought about that as we're coming up on the end of this book. And I will probably start the next book since lockdown's not over. Will I do other readings? I mean, this is it's a lot to do every night, but it's so easy to, throw on Instagram Live and do a special thing that I think I will probably end up doing a lot more of these. And I think that everyone's kind of figuring out that it is possible to do this stuff from home. So I think I will do other readings. It'll be interesting. And through Patreon and other things, we'll see how it goes. But at the moment, I'm just working on the Orphan Tales. The other thing, like the reason that I chose the Orphan Tales is because there's no audiobook of it. So the Orphan Tales is in this sort of weird liminal space where I have performance rights of it. But I don't have audio rights. I can't sell an audiobook of it. And there will never be one as long as Random House has the rights. I mean, this book came out in 2006, so they're not going to put out an audiobook of it. So it has a very unique position where if as long as I'm performing it, or someone else's, that I've given permission to, it's not running afoul of anyone else's contracts. Do I have other works like that? Absolutely, I do. And it's I certainly will pursue doing stuff like this more often in the future. The live streams, I really enjoy doing this and having some connection with you guys, and it's not so much terrible labor that I wouldn't like to keep doing it. What would my spirit animal or animals be? My Patronus? I don't know. I don't know. I genuinely don't. Maybe an orca. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest where they're everywhere. And I'm big and I make pretty but slightly obnoxious singing sounds and have sharp teeth. It's funny. I was there a year before my son was born, so I wasn't even pregnant yet. And I saw a huge pod of orca. I had never seen one before. There were 9 of them. We were out on the Sound, and I'd never in my life seen them in the wild, and it turned out to be a year to the day before my son was born. So they were giving me a sign. So maybe orcas. Was the Maggie one of my creations or based on existing myth and folklore? She is mine. I wanted a gross, actually fishy mermaid. That wasn't slender and pretty, that actually had very fishy features, how I would think a half person, half fish would actually come out. You liked Inanna on Patreon. I'm glad, and I'm gonna be posting other poetry in celebration of the 3-year anniversary of my Patreon soon. I'm just kind of drowning under work and deadlines and not having any childcare right now, so I'm working on everything at the moment. I'm scrambling for the edge of a cliff. It's actually really convenient for me. I have trouble traveling. I've watched more readings in the last month than life. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that we've all learned here is that this stuff is possible. It's possible to do a nice job. It's possible to draw an audience, and it's possible to manage a lot of this stuff from home. there'll always be book tours and traveling and readings and stuff like that. And I really enjoy that stuff, and I know a lot of other authors do too. And meeting people in person, there's no substitute for that. But, you know, you don't need a publisher to approve doing something like this and pay for your plane tickets. So I think that a lot of us will end up doing things like this. And now, you know, I've got my little setup here, and you know, I know how to do it. I know how to light it. I know how to make it look pretty. And I've really learned a lot through this whole process. So yeah, I think that it's one of the things that will change slowly but surely, and it's probably a good thing for those of us who like to do readings, and there's a ton of authors who don't, to be able to sort of own the means of production, so to speak. Was there any particular reasoning behind the animals I chose for Maggie Dan? You know, probably, but I don't remember what it was. It was 18 years ago that I wrote it. I have no memory. I do remember trying to work out how many animals I could fit in there and still have like a person who could walk and function in any conceivable way. But beyond that, I was just trying to get in as many as I could. I'm sure that there is some kind of deep spiritual reason for each and every one of them. I am positive, because that's who I am. It's who I am as a writer. But who I also am is a forgetful person with ADD, and I don't remember what the meaning behind it was. So whatever meaning you think is there, let's just pretend that's what I meant. So yeah, no, it's really hard to remember everything that went into a book that I wrote so long ago when I was so young. And, you know, bits and pieces of this, the vast majority of this book was written between, I can do the years, 2002 and 2005. But then through the editing process, I don't remember what exactly was added, but I know things were added and altered and everything, through to 2006. So it's hard to say. It's really, you know, unless it's something I had a reason to remember. My motive. This is why I can't forget a drink. My motivations for one thing over another thing is hard to dredge up out of the depths of time. And not just the depths of time, but just the depths of everything that's happened in my life and all the books I've written since then. You know, good Lord, this really was my first major novel. So virtually everything I've written has come since this. And I've had to fill my head with worlds upon worlds other than these, and it's just all kind of crowded out. But that's why you put it between two covers, so you never ever have to think about it or remember it again once it's out. It just exists out in the world, and you don't think about like how personal some of these stories are. My God, the second book is like full of stories that if you actually knew me in my life, is just deeply, deeply personal. But you don't, so it's literature. That's how literature works. So yeah, this style of book, it's definitely different. You know, it was different then, it's different now. The whole frame narrative thing, very classically inspired. It's kind of like there's Hyperion by Dan Simmons, which is sort of, I mean, Dan Simmons kind of sucks. He is not a fan of the non-whites, Dan Simmons. Not to disparage anybody on stream, but he's not a great guy. But he did write a very beautiful book called Hyperion, which is based structurally on the Canterbury Tales. And this is kind of in that vein, but there's not very many that have this kind of sort of frame narrative on steroids structure. Hyperion is always the first one that comes to mind, but that's also very deeply science fictional, not fantasy at all. So yeah, The Bitterwood Stories by Angela Slatter, yeah, but with no frame story. That's the thing, like, look, I didn't invent this at all. I ripped it right off the Arabian Nights. There is nothing that I invented here. But I do fancy that I found a different way to tell a fantasy story than most at the time, and certainly a different way to do exposition. But who knows how this will be remembered. I'm thrilled to pieces that people remember it at all. In any way, 14 years after it came out and 18 years after I wrote it. It's amazing that people still care about it, that you guys are tuning in every night to see it, that it's in any way something that still touches or is relevant to people's lives. Oh, thank you guys. That's very sweet of you to say. That's very kind. Yeah, I've said all along, it's been a strange journey for me, into the past. But I have enjoyed taking it with you, and good Lord, now we're only about 35 pages from the end, so mid next week we'll be done, and on to the next book, I suppose. Library time capsule book. That's amazing. Thank you. Wow. Yeah. Whoa, 50 years from 2019. Well, let's hope that we're opening time capsules 50 years from 2019. Well, that is all the time I will take from you guys tonight. I will post this on the archive, and see you tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I too hope the people of the Wisconsin town that you work in will rediscover it. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I will see you tomorrow night. Bye, guys.